Thank you for your kind words, and I just spent 2 weeks ago a week at Kentucky, Tennessee, and they worked me. I had 5 presentations before lunch, 3 in the evening, and 2 Trinity workshops. And now I've come home to, let me see if we can just do something quick so I get presenter mode here now that we're connected. There we go. And then the last 2 weeks, I taught a graduate class that's 1 semester compressed into 2 weeks. So my voice is a little bit on the edge today, but we'll pray that. So we got plenty of water, more water hidden down here, and away we go that way. But a pleasant surprise, first of all, the folk I've been able to meet. It's a nice, friendly group, and a nice spirit in this church. And an extra pleasant surprise to discover that your pianist was in school with me in Pioneer Valley Academy just a couple of years ago. And between her and me, we killed it. And so it no longer exists, unfortunately. A small conference had 3 academies, and that was the one of 2 that lost out, so and go from there. But anyways, so I got to double check if she still goes by Jeannie, but that's how I knew her. Okay. And so, she's introducing, you look familiar, where have we met? And she goes, I went to school to UPV. Jeannie, And I even remember her maiden name, or something close to it at least, right? And so I joke with my students, there are 3 signs of old age. The first is loss of memory. I forgot the other 2. The only one better than that was Victor Borger, where he says, there's 3 things I cannot remember. And he stops him. No, it's 4. And go from there. On a more serious note, we are coming back now. I'm more in teaching mode than preaching mode today, but we'll try to blend the 2. It's harder when you're working through a technical topic to get going on the preaching side as well. And so we'll see what happens here. But any rate, I'll mention I am the husband of 1 wife, and last December was our 45th anniversary, which I can't figure out because I'm only 29. We have 2 children, 1 living, a daughter who has followed many of her colleagues and hasn't darkened the door of the church in a while, but is close to us, lives in Ohio, and our son who was an elder in his church and passed away suddenly 5.5 years ago. And so that's been a challenging journey as well, but the Lord is using it for us to be able to minister to others. And so that's the short of it. No grandchildren, and at this point we're not sure any are on the way. And I am regretting possibly the fact that I'll never get to test my father's theory about grandparenting. He would say, why do grandparents and grandchildren get along so well? And his answer was, they have a common enemy. Alrighty. So with a little that, I'm going to repeat something I did at Sabbath School briefly for resources, and then the focus today is going to be on the Holy Spirit. So we'll come back there in a moment. I should say at the second service here. So by way of review, this has been around for quite a while. And at the ABC, it's definitely written to the average non-trained theologian. Covers a little bit of Adventist history, a little bit of the Bible, kind of a quick reference guide. It's certainly very helpful. In about the last year or so, we've come out, the Biblical Research Institute at the General Conference reached out to around 62 or 3 of us, and they published 2 volumes, and these can also be gotten at your Adventist Book Center. There also, BRI, Biblical Research Institute, has a number of their publications now in Kindle form at a much cheaper than the paper book. And so $9.99 each in Kindle. I'm going to guess probably $30 to $50 for hardcovers, per volume. And as I recall, it's 63 chapters with 62 authors. And volume 1 is basically the guys on the cover, John Peckham and stuff, doing biblical foundations and some, a little church history, but kind of the core of the doctrine. And then volume 2 is questions and answers that we've gotten from around the world. And I and Dr. Lake were 2 professors from Southern who each have a chapter in volume 2. And I was not assigned a chapter that of my preference, but I buckled down. And then they asked me to do the impossible, to cover about 4 chapters worth of topics in 2,500 words. And so, interrelations of the Trinity plus Mormonism plus Jehovah's Witnesses. So, 1 chapter. Thank you very much this way. So that's available. And if you're a Kindle on that subscription book program, you can get these for free. And so just have that. We also have a Ministry of the Adventist Theological Society. I'm a past president from about 15 years ago, and called perspectivedigest.org. And it's set up with 2 search windows, one by author, one by topic. And there's all sorts of stuff in here. But as president, and then later they asked for a little more, I've got several short articles, like 3-page kind of stuff. And Perspective Digest is made for a laity. We also take scholarly journal articles from our scholarly journal, and they get edited down to kind of the Reader's Digest version for Perspective Digest. And the uppermost one there, 25-1, is the Reader's Digest version of a scholarly article I wrote on Proverbs 30 as related. What is his name and what is his son's name? I'm going to argue that's not even Godhead at all. And we'll leave you to read. You can look at that here. And so I've got 8 items on the Trinity in there. If you type in the word Trinity in the subject without anybody in the author, it'll pull up those. Plus, I think there's 2 or 3 others. I was surprised at how few Trinity stuff we had in here, but they are in there. We've got all sorts of, doctrine of man, doctrine of God, judgment, all sorts, So hack around if you want to use that resource for backgrounds as well. Also in 2019, I didn't notice that as close, we had a Trinity Symposium at the Benton Church out toward the Ocoee, and Georgia Cumberland recorded all of that, and they've got that on YouTube. And the link at the bottom of the slide will give you the playlist. And so this is the same slide we had earlier, and we can tell that this is a more mature congregation because nobody has the phones up taking pictures of the slide to get the link for later, right? And so your elder, I can always email that on to them, to Don, or is it Jack? And give you that link. This you had Dr. Lake, Judd Lake, now retired, and myself and Pastor Matt Tinkham doing about, 6 hours or so of materials there. And so you can access that resource as well. I want to repeat again today, this morning, because the audience has increased, but I believe that one of the spiritual theological functions of the Trinity doctrine, number one, like the second commandment, it helps us remind ourselves you really cannot comprehend God. Don't box him into a physical image. Don't box him into a mental image. I like to tell my students, idolatry is alive and well. We're now carving our God out of ideas instead of out of wood and stone. And then it also challenges us to have a balanced view. Listen to the tape of the morning, but with the Father tending to represent the high imperial, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I call it the shock and awe attributes of God. And the Son, the kind of more personal, intimate, one-on-one, approachable side of God. And the Holy Spirit, kind of the mysterious, behind-the-scenes side of God. And Catholics tend to go imperial, so you need Mary between you and Jesus. Protestants tend to go Jesus, and we lose the awe. And Pentecostals go mystical, where you can kind of get divorced some from the Word, and it's how the Spirit leads me more than what the Word says, kind of a thing. Very subjective. But the Trinity tells me I have to pull all three into my view of God and balance those three. And so I think that's an advantage that way. Now today's focus, this second service, church service focus, is the Holy Spirit. And we have, at least in my exposure, two variants of non or anti-Trinity. I jokingly or semi-serious, the non-Trinitarian believes these alternate views, but they're quiet about it. The anti-Trinitarian believes the same thing and they agitate about it this way. The most common form that I have found over the last 20 years, as I've gone to many churches with this, I have jokingly called it binitarianism. They believe in a two-person Godhead, Father and Son, but the Holy Spirit is a non-person. It's an extension of the Father's presence. Somehow not. It's like the Father has some kind of core presence, but then this extended remote presence that's impersonal, yet the Father's extension, called the Holy Spirit. And there was a medical doctor named Gary Hultquist in particular who I was engaged with over this down in Georgia. And I said, so it sounds to me like you believe there's only two persons in the Godhead. Absolutely correct, Father and Son. And then the Father precedes the Son in existence. So we dealt with that in the previous section. And hence, a trinity of persons, they now have a binity of persons this way. A alternative that is becoming more common is to argue that Christ and Holy Spirit are one and the same person. That the Holy Spirit is Jesus kind of unincarnating himself to come back to us in a more omnipresent form. So the Holy Spirit and Jesus, so they have a two-person Godhead, but that the second person, Jesus and the Holy Spirit, are one and the same being. Okay? Now this reflects an ancient heresy that the creedal Trinitarians rejected, called modalism. And modalism was the idea that there's one God who manifests himself, one person who manifests himself in three modes. So this one person sometimes manifests as Father, sometimes manifests as Son, sometimes manifests as Holy Spirit, but it's actually all one person doing three different modes. So that's the ancient heresy of modalism. So what these folks are doing is that they're doing modalism with Son and Spirit, but still keeping the Father separate so that they have two persons. Now, we will address more the first group, but the second group will come into play as we go. Now, I'm focusing in this presentation on the evidence of the personhood of the Holy Spirit, and when we get to John 14 to 16, why I think modalism doesn't work. So if I say modalism again, we all one person in multiple modes this way. Now, we're going to look for evidences of personhood of the Holy Spirit by looking at the Holy Spirit doing things that we would ascribe to a person. I'm going to do a brief look at the Old Testament and then look at the New Testament, and then, time permitting, a couple of Ellen White quotes, being Adventist Church, to pull her into the situation this way. First of all, we have to decide what is a person, because some people struggle. They hear the word person and they think human or they think created creature. But by person, we simply mean a being capable of moral, intelligent relationships, rational, intelligent, moral relationships. And so such a being does not have to be a created being. God is capable of such relationships. So we could have human persons, angelic persons, divine persons. This way. So when we say God is a person, we're not saying he's created. We're just saying he's capable of these things. And ditto the Holy Spirit. So again, our primary tool is to look for functions that we would associate with the Holy Spirit. Pardon this voice, the 3 weeks are catching up to me. Ezekiel 11, I'm summarizing here. The Holy Spirit has a conversation with Ezekiel. He speaks. He uses language. He communicates. These kinds of things. That's the function of a person. Isaiah 40, verses 13 and 14. He knows, the Holy Spirit knows things, right? Who can counsel him, etc. this way. He can be counseled, he can understand things, knowledge. These are all factors of the Holy Spirit, functioning as a person. Impersonal forces don't know, they don't understand, they can't communicate this way, especially a highly impersonal force, a rock, a plant. They don't directly communicate this way. We keep going in Isaiah 63. The Holy Spirit can be vexed or grieved and can be rebelled against, can function as an enemy and fight. These are all, again, personal functions. Vex, grieve, emotion, rebelling against, all point to person. And the context here in Isaiah is not the type of poetry where we have mountains praising the Lord or something like this. He's in a very literal mode. And of course in Genesis 6:3, the Holy Spirit strives with man. And I think this striving, I need to say a quick word here. Some scholarly sources and modern translations will say my spirit will not abide with man. There is some debate, but I think that the strongest sources definitely favor a root related to striving and contending, especially kind of a courtroom. You're making a legal argument. And so I think strive is the better translation. And these are all functions of striving with men over what's right, over what's wrong, knowing, etc. We're going to find all this in the New Testament. Now, I'm not doing it in the same order that I just did in the Old Testament. Ephesians 4 verse 30. Paralleling Isaiah, do not grieve the Spirit of God. Emotional response attributed to the Holy Spirit. Matthew 12, in 31 to 32, I had a brother here asking me questions about the sin against the Holy Spirit, unpardonable sin. Well, these are the verses. And what's interesting is that we have this contrast or juxtaposition between blaspheming Christ, who is a divine person. Sin against Christ, that can be forgiven. Blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, suddenly that's not forgivable. By the way, if they're both the same person, why the difference? This way. This is repeated in Mark and Luke. And so if the Holy Spirit can be sinned against, insulted, or blasphemed, seems like it's got to be a person. And then, of course, the great Ananias and Sapphira passage where they're told, first, you've lied to the Holy Spirit. I don't lie to a rock, or a pulpit. And then we're told, you've lied to God. Parallelism this way. So the Holy Spirit can be lied to. I think that's significant this way. In Romans 8, the Holy Spirit is an intercessor who intercedes for us. This is that great passage that we don't know how to pray like we ought to. So the Holy Spirit intercedes with us with groans too deep for words. This text was especially comforting to me when my son died, and I felt like I had no prayer life. And I would just say, Lord, I don't feel like you're there, but the Holy Spirit's supposed to intercede, so please do what I'm unable to do for myself. That kind of a thing. Intercession. We associate that with priestly functions. That's the function of a person. Then in the same passage, we're told that the Holy Spirit has a mind, which means the Holy Spirit can think. Having a mind, attribute of a person, not of an impersonal extended presence or something this way. In Acts 13 and 1 Corinthians, the Holy Spirit is a causal agent who makes things happen, who makes decisions. I'm going to go in reverse order. In 1 Corinthians 12, the Holy Spirit decides who gets which spiritual gifts. It's an administrative function performed by the Holy Spirit. That's an attribute of a person. And then in Acts 13, the Holy Spirit speaks to the church, set apart for me, Paul and Barnabas, to the work that I have called them to. And so the Holy Spirit is again making an administrative decision, and I'm calling you to do this work. Now I want to say a quick word about pronouns here. The fact that the Holy Spirit uses the personal pronoun me, I think that pronoun is significant. In Greek, ego is the I, and the dative would be one way of the me. Same pronoun in different form this way. I would be careful about the third person, he and it, because John and Paul follow the Greek grammar. So when they talk about, especially John, the Holy Spirit as comforter, that's masculine, parakletos. So when he then uses a pronoun of the parakletos, comforter, he puts it in the masculine. However, the Spirit in Greek is a neuter noun. It's neither masculine nor feminine. And when John refers to the Spirit side of the equation, instead of the parakletos side, he uses the neuter it. So I don't think the he argument for the Holy Spirit works. But the I, me argument, that is significant. The first person pronoun being used by the Holy Spirit himself, that I think carries weight to the personhood argument this way. Matthew 28, we've mentioned this already. He shares a name with the Father, and with Hebrews 3, where the Holy Spirit is cited as Yahweh by the Father, in 1:10, adds to that. Very interestingly, I've only found one place, but there is one place in Hebrews where the Holy Spirit is linked to the name Yahweh. Because he's going to quote a Psalm 95 here, and in the book of Hebrews 3:7, he says, "And as the Holy Spirit said," and he quotes this psalm. But when you go to that psalm, it's Yahweh who's saying it. So ironically, in Hebrews, the Son is equated with Yahweh, and now the Holy Spirit is equated with Yahweh. Only place that I know of where you have this direct linkage of the Holy Spirit to Yahweh by saying something Yahweh said is the Holy Spirit speaking. So that's interesting to me. Again, the fact that the Holy Spirit speaks personal function. Because speaking involves intelligence and the whole bit this way. Now again, some will try for the seven spirits in Revelation as being the Holy Spirit. I believe that's true because we're in symbolism, but some may argue that the seven spirits are literally seven spirits, and it's harder to argue. We have enough other verses that I don't have to plant my cross on this hill. But if you accept the seven spirits as representing the Holy Spirit, then you have greetings from the Holy Spirit as well. John 16. The Holy Spirit convicts of sin, righteousness, and judgment. Now, I think this is the parallel to the striving in Genesis 6. Now let's do a quick timeout. What's the work of the Holy Spirit? What three things? Well, actually, it's one work with three emphases. Conviction is the work of the Holy Spirit in three areas. Sin, righteousness, and judgment. How would you describe those three areas to a kindergartner in Sabbath school? What would sin and righteousness be? Right and wrong. What's judgment? You're accountable for your actions. Right? Work of the Holy Spirit to convict of moral qualities. Understanding moral qualities, I think, points toward personhood. Be able to convict of those in us as the image of a moral God. Then in John 14 and 16, the Holy Spirit becomes a teacher who's going to teach us things that Jesus says, I can't tell you now, but I'll send the Holy Spirit and He'll teach you and He'll guide you. And we see that guidance in the book of Acts. Don't go here, these kinds of things this way. But again, teaching, personal function, type of communicating, etc., this way. And then in John 14, I will pray the Father. I think this is the text where it's not John 16. I'm combining two. He's going to tell you it's to your advantage I go away. But we haven't gotten there yet. But I will pray the Father. Clearly, Christ and the Father are different beings. And He will give you another Counselor to be with you forever. Now, I want to work with the another first. Jesus testifies that the Holy Spirit is another, someone other than Himself. He's a different being, a different entity, not a new mode of myself, but someone other than me. Now, we're going to build on that just a little more before we come back to the comforter part. In our biblical language of Greek, we have two Greek words that we translate as another in English. The first one is heteros. I put English spelling in the parentheses there. Heteros. Now, if we talk about romantic relationships and we say a person is in a heterosexual relationship, that would be what relationship of sexes? Opposite or differing, right? Sexes of a differing kind as opposed to homosexual, right? So heteros in Greek was another of a differing kind. So for example, when Paul challenges the Galatians that they are starting to follow another gospel, that's a heteros gospel. It's different from the true gospel. Then we have allos, another of the same kind. Jesus is in a series of parables, and He says, here allos, another parable, and it's in the same vein, kind of a thing, right? So if you were at potluck, and let's say somebody is serving instead of self-serve, and you've got a selection of fruits, and let's say you ate a banana and you come back with the banana skin empty hanging from your hand, and you're at a Greek potluck. If you said, give me a heteros fruit, they would give you something other than a banana that's still fruit. See, another fruit of a differing kind, right? They give you an apple. If you come back and say, give me an allos piece of fruit, you'll get another banana. So far, so good? So Jesus says that this comforter is allos, another of the same kind as me. Now, the scholars note there are some places where in New Testament Greek and people will, kind of mix things up a bit like we do in English. But usually in the context it's pretty clear, and I see nothing in John 14 that would indicate a mix-up. No grammar indicators or anything. So I think allos is very clearly another of the same kind like me. But before we put all the pieces together, I want to go to the comforter side now. The Greek word is parakletos, which again you can see in the parentheses if you want to read it in English, parakletos. We get the Old English word paraclete. Some of you may have heard that. A paraclete, like a lawyer or advocate for you this way. And so John 14 and 16, Parakletos is used for the Holy Spirit. Now, this is not the same word for intercessor in Romans 8, so don't try to link it that way. However, in 1 John 2:1, Jesus is Parakletos. So let's unpack it. Because in our John translations, we will often say comforter or counselor. Right? I will send another comforter or another counselor. But for some reason, in 1 John 2, in our English translations, they translate it as advocate. I write these things to you that you may not sin. But if you do sin, we have an Parakletos, an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. Now, our modalist Adventist, see 1 John 2, Jesus is Parakletos. So when Jesus sends, I'll send another counselor, the counselor that's being sent is Jesus because Jesus is Parakletos. But the problem, Jesus says, I'm sending another of the same kind, Parakletos. So the implication is, I am the first comforter, but I'm sending another like me. So I would argue Jesus treats the Holy Spirit as someone other than himself, as distinct from himself. First of all, I will pray the Father, he will send the Holy Spirit, but then a few verses later, I will send him. So Jesus treats the Holy Spirit as someone else whom I, Jesus, will send. So when you put the way Jesus speaks of the Holy Spirit in John 14 and 16, he treats the Holy Spirit as someone distinct and other to himself. Plus, modalism was rejected in the first place because who conceived Jesus? Holy Spirit. Did he conceive himself? Who drove Jesus into the wilderness? Holy Spirit. Did he drive himself? This is the guy that said, I don't do anything of myself with you. And so the interactions of Jesus and Holy Spirit, where the Holy Spirit guides him and drives him and so forth, combined with Jesus himself speaking in language that designates the Holy Spirit as someone distinct from himself, is why we've rejected that Jesus and Holy Spirit are one and the same person. This way. Mine was working. Let me try yours and see if it will keep working. All right. So, now, Parakletos, what's that? That's kind of like your legal counsel in court who advocates for you. That's a person. Now I got to put an asterisk on this, because a few people are trying to use AI as their lawyer now, artificial intelligence. But I think Christ is better than AI and the Holy Spirit is better than AI. So the Holy Spirit is thus not Christ in a new modality because he is other from Christ, but he's another of the same kind as Christ. He's not lesser than Christ this way. So if Christ is a divine counselor, Holy Spirit has to be divine counselor to be another of the same kind. If Jesus is a personal counselor, it would seem like the Holy Spirit needs to be a personal counselor, to be one of the same kind. Now, I suppose our modalists would say, we certainly say he's personal. But again, he's another. He's not one and the same person this way. Kind of did that slide already. So let's go to our summary. The Holy Spirit in the Old Testament and New Testament has emotions like a personal being. Speaks and holds conversation, language, conversation, like a personal being. Has a mind like a personal being, and does this intercession work, which is the work of a personal being, there in Romans 8. He strives with man over sin, that's the convicting work. He teaches, he makes administrative decisions, and must be of the same kind as Christ, so must be divine in a person, yet is other from Christ and different as personal being. I think for me the evidence is pretty strong that there's a very consistent pattern of treating the Holy Spirit as a personal being and of the same nature and kind as Christ. Now, we'll take a couple of minutes here. Ellen White on the Holy Spirit. We're kind of going on to McDonald Road time here. The Holy Spirit always leads to the written word. A lot of these are in evangelism, condensed in evangelism, 6:16 to 17. I'm quoting the fuller versions. One of my brothers mentioned this already. Yeah, I got all I need in evangelism on this. Technically correct. And I may not read every sentence here, but notice the Holy Spirit is a person, for he beareth witness with our spirits that we are children of God. When this witness is born, it carried with it its own evidence. At such times we believe and are sure that we are children of God, and so forth this way. And then she continues, we bear witness with John that we have known and believed and loved that God has for us, and so forth. Next paragraph, same quote. The Holy Spirit has a personality, else he could not bear witness to our spirits and with our spirits that we are children of God. He must also be a divine person, else he could not search out the secrets which lie hidden in the mind of God. Then she quotes Paul, for what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of a man which is in him, even so the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. I don't believe the Holy Spirit is a person because Ellen White said so. I believe that she's a true prophet because she's agreeing with the Bible on the personhood of the Holy Spirit. But it's an extra evidence. This was at Avondale in a talk. We have been brought together, I think this is the Evangelism 6:16. We've been brought together as a school, and we need to realize that the Holy Spirit, who is as much a person as God is a person, is walking through these grounds so that the Lord is our keeper and helper. He hears every word we utter and knows every thought of the mind. Holy Spirit, who is as much a person as God is a person. And then several times she calls the Holy Spirit the third person of the Godhead. First paragraph. Second paragraph, she describes a heavenly trio. Quote, there are three living persons of the heavenly trio. In the name of these three great powers, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, names them off. Those who receive Christ by living faith are baptized and so forth and become subject of heaven. One anecdote, preaching at a church probably, 40 minutes or so from here, closer to Collegedale, small church, not covering this subject as such. A member of that church who was into the impersonal Holy Spirit, starts, emailing me. And back and forth, back and forth. And we got into Ellen White a little bit. And I said, how do you explain her calling the Holy Spirit the third person? Because if she says there's three, who are the other two? Kind of thing, right? And this is where some of them will argue that these were fabrications of the White estate to make Ellen White Trinitarian later. Key statements like this, number one, most of these statements that are Trinitarian of Ellen White, we literally have the pencil on paper copies. Or pen on paper, whichever, right? This way. In some cases, they were destroying the pen on paper once it was transcribed. Then she would take that typed transcription and edit around and change this and change that. And she's editing around in that typewritten version, doesn't change it, sends it back to the, then they retype it with her revisions. Then she does one more look, a little tweak here, a little tweak there, and then I sign this off for publication. So we've got the paper trail. They'll just say, oh, that's fabrication. I'm like, you're immune to evidence, kind of a thing. So we do have very clearly often the literal handwritten, pre-type written documents, this way of these statements this way. And I think that they have an online video at White Estate that you can do to there. So Ellen White clearly describes the Holy Spirit as a personal being, separate from the Father and Son. And she describes him as being the third person of the Godhead, and that he's part of a heavenly trio. So what? First of all, I think the impersonal Holy Spirit contradicts a good many biblical texts that we've just looked at. Secondly, contradicts Ellen White's views. If I take this seriously, then this Holy Spirit that comes into my heart and life, if it's impersonal presence, I think that could easily turn into kind of a pantheistic view of God like E.J. Wagner had. God infuses me with his Spirit. And if you're not careful, that turns into what some of those early Adventists did into holy flesh. The Holy Spirit's in me. Everything is coming from the Holy Spirit, not from me, so I don't filter it because it's from the Holy Spirit. And these people are leaving their husbands and wives because the Holy Spirit told them to, stuff like this. That was Adventist history. I haven't seen this go with here yet, but I think there's a potential for it. I think the big one is this. If the leading edge of God to us is the Holy Spirit to convict of sin, and that leading edge is an impersonal extension of God instead of a personal presence, how do we reach the world around us? And it's easy to do it impersonal. Send a web link, send a literature, but don't get too close, don't get involved, etc. No, Christ, God, came in person, in the flesh, and he comes to us in person through the Holy Spirit, not just as a force field extension, but as a personal approach, one-to-one, intimate. And that affects us. We should make one-on-one relationships where people trust and know us, so that allows us to share with them in a trustworthy sense that way. Finally, I'll say this much. My experience with alternative movements like this, I'll be a little more direct. When we say that Christ was not begotten as a divine being, that he's co-eternal with the Father, and that and we'll get into this afternoon, that his begetting is of the human side. They believe that we're denying the sonship of Christ, and that that's a salvation issue. So they're agitating because they, quote, love us and want to save us from denying this sonship in the background, so to speak. What I think really happens is it's a spirituality that is based, and some of us who are a little more mature, growing up in the 60s, or some of you maybe even the late 50s, 60s, early 70s, but especially 50s, 60s, we tended to have a spirituality that defined itself by what it opposed. We don't eat pork. We don't drink. We don't smoke. The Antichrist is a certain office, And our conversion techniques tended to be, look at how everybody else is wrong, we're right. And so we tended to have an identity that was defined more by opposing than what it stood for. And when we're not careful, that can become a quiet form of spiritual pride. I have the elite knowledge and you're the poor second-class citizen. And personally, most of the people that I've engaged on this seem to operate in that oppositional spirituality where their self-definition is defined by what they oppose more than by what they stand for. And so it gives them a sense of superiority and a sense of a kind of mission and purpose to go fix the church. And in this area, they can thrive because of the large number of Adventists to glean from. The further out you get, it becomes little pockets here and there, but if we're wrong and they're right, why don't they go win the world? But they can't. They only survive by the parasitic relationship to the church. That tells me something too. And so, just as the Trinity calls me to be humble in acknowledging who God is, and that I cannot box God into my head, it should also make me humble in how I share God with others, that I don't get too dogmatic about details where the Bible is less clear. Which again affects our mission. How arrogant are we when we go to meet people? And so my appeal today would be, Holy Spirit's a person, He's different from Christ, but that knowledge should lead us to humility that the Trinity, we have pieces we know for certain, but we really can't understand it. But by God's grace, we go with His Spirit as the representative of Christ to us, working with us while Christ is in heaven, stuck in human form. But God comes personally to us so that we can do the work of making disciples that He's called us to do. And instead of internal arguments, there's a point where we can say, we know who we are, let's focus on the disciple making and say no to the discussions that distract us from it. The more we play nice and keep discussing and discussing, the more we fuel the discussion. There's a point where we agree to disagree and we get about our master's business. And that's what I would challenge you to do. I don't know that you have big agitation in this church, but little churches always maybe have one or two. And so stay focused on what God has called you to do. Keep the bigger picture in mind. I think we have got good evidence that Christ is eternal both directions. I think we've got good evidence that the Holy Spirit is a personal entity, and that we don't have to be ashamed and spend our lives defending this. We can move on to better things. So let's get about our Master's business. But we do need depth to be able to answer questions. That's what today has been about. And we'll do some more depth this afternoon.